Welcome to All Grown Up Now, Tales of a Checkered Past. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is an evolution of the tale, All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts. This is Season 2, and it's called Tales of a Checkered Past. It's a collection of short stories from my salad days on up to the present. In each podcast, another self-contained story will be presented. These podcasts will be broadcast bi-weekly, so you get 2 a month. Enjoy. Episode 67 is another homage to another one of the strong women who have shaped my life and my career. This is a woman named Simone Sethna. I learned pattern making from her. For those listening, her name is spelled Simmin, but it's pronounced Simone. Now, I don't know how that came to be, but no matter. But as I said, the knowledge I learned from her has made my career possible. And so this is my tribute to Simone. In 1990, I was living in San Francisco and selling accessories, hats, and jewelry to the posh LA store. The big item I sold there was an evening vest. This vest was made in 2 versions, the full vest and the vest front. There was embellishment on the lapels and pockets, and the body fabric was beaded. They were packaged in black velvet boxes, quite deluxe. In 1990s prices, they retailed for $1,700 apiece. In my studio, I experimented with small clothing pieces, bustiers mainly, little bolero jackets, and the mermaid gowns. I'd stayed away from making clothing because while I was proficient in the construction, fitting was my downfall. I had learned some pattern making first in 1 semester after I graduated college, the rest on the fly. In 1989, the posh LA store wanted a dinner jacket that had the same feeling as the vests. Embellished lapels and pockets, lavish. For a first go, they sent me a jacket to show me the silhouette they were selling. I had a pattern taken from the jacket, modified it to incorporate the shape of the lapel and pocket I wanted, and off we went. However, in fashion, the only constant is change. And in 1990, the silhouette of the clothing changed radically. In 1 season, gone were the huge shoulders and oversized wedge silhouettes of the 80s. In their place was a more cylindrical line with a less padded shoulder. I was caught flat-footed. My agent, Brenda, suggested that I contact Simone. Brenda had studied with Simone for years and explained that Simone's training would ensure we would get a pattern that was absolutely correct for this new silhouette. So I called and made an appointment. On the appointed day, I met Simone in her apartment on the 12th floor of the Park Merced Towers, just south of San Francisco State University. She lived there with her husband, I discovered later, the long-suffering Mr. Sethna. 1 room of this large apartment was dedicated to her school. This was her classroom. I had brought a number of things I had made just to show her what I was designing. Brenda had recommended I do this, as she told me that Simone didn't suffer fools or dilettantes. To describe the woman herself, Simone was of a certain age, short, she was 5'2" in high heels, and we used to joke that she wore them in the shower. Just kidding. Simone was Persian, slim, great-looking, with piercing dark eyes, and wavy salt and pepper hair cut stylishly short. Her clothes were amazing. When she greeted me at the door, she was charm itself. This made me relax. Which was a mistake. After the initial small talk, we got down to business. I started by showing her the things I had brought, and she seemed to enjoy seeing them. Simone raved that she hadn't seen work like this since she was in Paris. I let my guard down even more. Feeling more comfortable, I then explained what I wanted to hire her to do, which was to generate the dinner jacket pattern in the new silhouette. As I remember, we were both standing. Her eyes flashed fire, and she said sternly, "Do you know how much this is going to cost you?" "No," I said weakly. $500, she announced. That was more than the monthly rent on my studio. "And do you know why I'm going to charge you that much?" Simone demanded. "No. Why?" "Because I can. Because you don't know." Simone got in my face and pointed her finger at my nose. "You are stupid not to know this," she boomed. "Why don't you know this?" "Because I never studied formally," I said. "If you don't know how to do this, you'll be at the mercy of people like me, and then you won't know whether I did it or not correctly." I'm sure I looked stupefied, because Simone looked satisfied. "You study with me," she demanded. "When I get done with you, you won't need anyone, not even Simone." And that's when I discovered that Simone often referred to herself in the third person. "It will take 2 years, but if you study hard, you will know what I know," she said, satisfied. I stood there not knowing what to say. Simone looked at one of the pieces, a black wool crepe bolero jacket with bell sleeves and a standing collar. It was lined in powder pink Duchess satin. She admired it and commented that the collar, it was cut as one with the body, was very much like the French style. "I charge $450 a month," she said. "You come one day, you come every day, same price. You can pay some of the tuition by making me a jacket like this." I regarded that as a compliment. "But the dinner jacket pattern, $500, 50% upfront." And she held her hand out. So I wrote the check out, shook hands, packed up my things, and left. And I knew I would be back. Before we continue, I think a little more information about Simone is in order. Simone was born in Calcutta of Persian parents. Her father was a doctor, and I imagine from what she told us in class that they were prosperous. At an early age, Simone started making clothes for her dolls. She had no formal training then, but intuitively understood what shapes the pieces of the garment needed to be. I imagine she figured a lot out through draping. When Simone was 19, she went to London to study patternmaking and returned to Calcutta to start her dressmaking business. Over time, her reputation grew, and eventually her shop made clothing for all the ladies in all the embassies. Along with that, she told us that she would help Mother Teresa train the nuns in embroidery. This was probably so she would have access to exactly what she wanted for her clients. Along the way, she married Mr. Sethna, who worked in electronics. They had 2 sons and 1 daughter. I imagine Simone wasn't an easy mother to have, and the children probably were raised by nannies. Simone worked like a fiend, and she told us that she got there early in the morning, and she worked until late in the evening. In her 40s, she decided that the British method of pattern making wasn't satisfactory, that she needed to know the French Couture method. To that end, she lobbied her clients at the embassies to help her get to Paris. The result? She was accepted at the École Gare Levine on the Rue Fortuny. Now, this was in the mid-1960s. In Paris, there was still a great deal of racism, as she told it. Since Simone had tan skin, she was somewhat at a disadvantage. That said, she wasn't a kid. She had been running a successful dressmaking concern in Calcutta for easily 15 years, a fact that she had to document as the École Guerlain required a minimum of 10 years' experience. And Simone was a force to be reckoned with. So off to Paris she went, leaving her husband and children back home and leaving her business in the hands of her premier hand. Simone arrived in Paris, good looking, good clothes, determination, and experience. The course lasted a year, and at the end, despite a shaky grasp of French and the discrimination, she graduated second in her class in 1967. She also had her certificates from the Chambre syndicale. Both the diploma and the certificates hung on the wall of the classroom. Aside from that, I know she had a ball when she was there. As she said to me one day, "When I was younger, I was really something." She was good-looking, well-dressed, and as a student, she had a pass to get into all sorts of cultural events, of which she took full advantage. And the husband and kids were back in Calcutta. After I finished studying with her, occasionally I would visit. One time, it was just the two of us in her classroom. And I asked her, if she didn't have family back in Calcutta, would she have stayed in Paris? "Dior always took the top 3 students," she replied. "I graduated second in my class." And I believe that that was the big regret in Simone's life. Back in Calcutta, Simone took back the reins of the business and grew her reputation for excellent clothes. As time went on, she started looking at where her children would go to college. She and her husband decided that they should go to the United States for college. To that end, Simone again lobbied her connections at the embassies on how to best go about this. The solution was she should move to the U.S., get work, and then send for her family. The American ambassador told her that her education in Paris was the equivalent to a doctorate degree, or at the very minimum, a master's. She got to the U.S., landed in San Francisco, and at first started working in the alterations department at iMagnin. That stifled her. Simone investigated teaching at the fashion schools, but disagreed with their approach to pattern making. So, eventually, she rented a little storefront on Bush Street and started Simone's School of Fashion. She advertised in the Yellow Pages, and she put in there that she taught the French method. After that issue of the Yellow Pages appeared, there arrived several letters from some of the local fashion schools. They insisted that she cease and desist advertising that she taught the French method because they thought she was making it up. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Simone promptly hired a lawyer, made copies of all her diplomas and documentation, and basically had the lawyer tell them all in strong legal language to fuck off. She, of course, would never have used that word, but she could get the point across nonetheless. From then on, she didn't have much to do with the fashion schools. But the students came, one of whom was Brenda, who eventually became my agent. And it was she who referred me to Simone. As the years passed, Simone gave up the storefront and moved her school to a room in her large apartment. And that's where we met. Oh, by the way, the jacket pattern was a success, and I made quite a few iterations of it throughout my career. It well paid for itself. It also led to me undertaking what I regard as my master's degree, even though I don't have a piece of paper to document it. I value the knowledge I gained while studying with Simone much more than my bachelor's degree. It made most of my work possible. I started studying with Simone in November of 1990. Brenda had warned me that while she could be charm itself, Simone could also be a major terror. I saw that on day 2. Now, the course is self-paced. There were 2 sections. First was the theory, all of the skirts, the sleeves, the collars, the necklines, the parts and pieces. The second part was models. This was when the students would put into practice the parts of the theory. Each picture required us to analyze the design by line, scale, what parts of the theory were used, and in what order the drafting progressed. That said, since it was self-paced, the students who were in class were all at different points in the course. One of the students was a Venezuelan woman named Sophia. There was a language barrier. Sophia's English wasn't that good. I discovered later that Sophia also didn't have a good understanding of how clothing went together. She would do things like put the interfacing on the outside of the garment, not inside. So Simone was frustrated with her. I was working on my first assignment, trying to keep my head down, when Simone exploded. Sophia had done something wrong on model number 3. I tried to make myself invisible while Simone was berating poor Sophia. Then I heard it. You! I could feel a finger pointing at me. I turned around and said weakly, "Me?" Simone pointed at the offending part of Sophie's garment and boomed, "What's wrong with this?" I looked, and I saw that the seam was puckered, which told me one side of the seam was too long, and I said as much. Simone whirled around to Sophia and shouted, "See, he's here only one day and he knows more than you do." I just wanted to disappear. Right then, 2 of the other students looked at each other and said, "We'll go put on the kettle," and they ran out of the room, and I followed. Simone insisted on tea at 10:30. I found the 2 of them in the kitchen with their heads together. I overheard one say, "He needs to be told." I peeked in and said, "I heard she's difficult." "She's a little Nazi," the other one said. And that was my initiation to the Simone School of Fashion. For the first week, Simone tried to intimidate me by calling out fractions problems. She wanted me to be able to divide fractions in my head so the calculations for pattern making would be quicker. So every now and then, when I was working on my assignment, she'd quietly sneak up behind me, pound the table, and shout something like, "What's a quarter of 33 3/4?" But I was prepared. When I was in grade school, Miss Ann had drilled me on the multiplication tables and fractions as her preferred form of torture. I remember careening around Salina, Kansas, being trapped in the aquamarine blue 1966 Pontiac land barge, Miss Ann chain-smoking pell-mells, shouting math problems. Simone had nothing on her. At the end of that first week, I turned to Simone and said, "You're not going to catch me out on that. My mother already beat you to it." Simone looked disappointed. Then one of the other students came over to ask her about a welt pocket. Simone loudly announced, while smacking the table, which she did regularly, "It takes at least 30 minutes to do a welt pocket properly." I think I let out a snort or a chuckle, I can't really remember. Simone pivoted around and glared and asked me, "Do you have something to say?" "I can do a welt pocket in about 10 minutes," I replied. Simone took out her watch and looked back at me. "Show me," she said. 7 minutes later, I handed her a sample of a welt pocket. "We'll continue," she said briskly. And I discovered that this was her tell that showed that she was flummoxed. But from then on, there was no intimidation, and during my time in class, any construction questions, she would refer to me. I was in therapy during my time with Simone. When I undertook the class, Simone insisted that I needed to go every day. Her terms were $450 a month, whether you went one day or whether you went every day. I said to my therapist, Dennis, that I had worked like a fiend in college, so I'd just have to do that again. As it was, I was selling briskly to the posh LA store, so I was already busy. I tried to keep up with everything for a couple of weeks, but realized that I couldn't. I would have to reduce my class days just to survive. Of course, I beat myself up over this. Dennis pointed out that Simone looked a bit like Miss Anne and acted like her too, and this was all good for therapy because I could see how I projected Miss Anne onto Simone. I shouted back that I didn't want to be in therapy more than once a week. I just wanted to learn pattern making. So I had the talk with Simone, telling her that I could only attend Wednesday to Friday. She got agitated, saying that she wouldn't reduce her price. It was all the same. "I understand that," I said, "and I'm okay with it. You're the only game in town, and if these are your terms, then I have to respect that. So be it." She looked surprised. "But you'll lose 2 days a week," she replied. "Those are your terms, and I want to know what you know." Simone furtively looked around the room. Then she leaned in and whispered, "What do you do on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons?" "My homework," I replied. "You stay behind on Wednesday and Thursday, and we'll work until 3. That way, you'll get your full value. Just don't tell anyone." And that's how we did it. On Wednesday and Thursday, at noon, I would pretend to pack up along with the other students. When everyone else was gone, Simone would give me lunch, then we would work until 3. I would contain all of my classwork in these 3 days, so the other 4 could be devoted to making product for the posh LA store. Simone may have been difficult, but she was also fair. As I mentioned, the class was divided into theory and models. The theory portion was in different sections: skirts, trousers, moulage, collars and sleeves, dresses, and necklines and draping. At the end of our instruction in the different parts of the theory, Simone would have an exam. The exam consisted of us pattern making and constructing what looked like a finished garment, usually in 6 hours in class. She chose the designs from her Book of Terrors. The Book of Terrors was one of those binder things you see at hardware stores. You know, the thing that's about 6 feet long and has all the page protectors in it? Hers was about 4 feet long, and it had page after page after page of pictures of clothes. So, during the course, she would flip through the Book of Terrors, pull out a picture, she would show it to us, and she would snap her fingers and say, "What's the basic? What's the basic? See the picture correctly." Which meant I needed to recite back what the parts of the theory were in the design and what order were they executed in. When she was satisfied with the answer, she'd snap her fingers again and demand order of construction. She was training us to know how to draft and how to assemble a design even before the piece was drafted. So, for the exam at the end of any section of theory, Simone would flip through the Book of Terrors, choose 3 photos, number them 1, 2, and 3, put the numbers on pieces of paper, and throw them in a basket. We were to draw out the number from the basket, and that's what we had to pull out of our ass in 6 hours in class. For my necklines and draping exam, I got a rather challenging picture. It was a large sailor-like collar with crossover draping. This made me sweat. I studied the drawing and figured out how to approach it. When I got the pattern drafted, I cut everything out, ready to put together. Now, I sew quickly, which is useful. Since my pattern making was still slow, I made up time by sewing very quickly. The garment had to look like a finished garment, but I knew a few tricks to cut corners on construction. So, as I was preparing to begin sewing, Simone cruised by and looked. "Oh, darling, that's completely wrong," she said. "What?" Which started a wrangle where Simone was in one parallel universe and I was in another. For over an hour, we haggled back and forth, my exam time ticking away. Finally, in desperation, I said, "Just let me pin it together and show you what I've done." So I quickly pinned it together, put it on the form, and held the photo next to it. I pointed to the detail in the picture and on the form and said, "See the picture correctly." A beat skipped. "Well, darling, that's correct," Simone said sweetly. I wanted to kill her right then. I would have cheerfully thrown her out the 12th floor window. What she saw in my eyes was, "Fashion teacher found dead at Pays of Park Merced Towers. Tape measure around her neck. News at 11. She said quietly, "You may finish at home." And I dramatically yanked my project off the form, threw it into my bag, and stormed out, vowing never to return. But I did. For the same reason I didn't kill her right then, I hadn't gotten all the knowledge she had. If I needed to, I could throw her out the window, but only after I graduated. I finished the course in the first part of August of 1991, exactly 9 months after I started. When I was coming close to the finish line, I remarked to Simone that she said it would take 2 years, and the one who held the record for finishing took 18 months. "There's a lot I didn't have to explain to you," she answered. "You came to me with a lot of knowledge already." After finishing the theory, I burned through the 30 models, 3 a week. I was a man on a mission. Now, while I can't balance a checkbook, I understand that 9 times $450 is less than 18 to 24 times $450. On the last day, after Simone had graded my final 3 models, my classmates and I went to the Zuni Cafe to celebrate. I was a little wistful that I wouldn't see Simone so frequently, but also relieved that I could relax a little. Not going to class opened up 3 days a week. Over the years, I would occasionally drop by her place to show a new piece or otherwise catch up with her. On one of these visits, I finally got a compliment from Simone. I had the coat that I called the cicada coat. It's hard to describe, but let's just say it's a good piece of pattern drafting and construction. Simone greeted me, introduced me to the students in her classroom, and I unbagged the coat. Simone put on her glasses, folded her arms across her chest, and rocked back on one high heel. This was her concentrating pose. I couldn't resist. I started snapping my fingers and insisting, "What's the basic? What's the basic, Simone?" The students in the room froze. Simone regarded the piece a few more minutes, and she answered wrong. I then snapped my fingers and insisted, "Order of construction." The students started hiding under the tables. Simone turned, looked at me, and said sweetly, "I'm not even going to attempt." The students looked astonished. They cautiously climbed out from under the tables. Simone turned to the students, pointed at me, and announced, "No one can touch him." That compliment is one of the highest I've ever received. I moved to New York in 2004, so I lost touch with Simone. But her knowledge was, in part, what got me here. To say I'm grateful for the time I had with her is truly an understatement. A few years back, I got a call from a fashion writer in the Bay Area. She was researching designers active in the Bay Area in the 80s and 90s, and I was on that list. So I guess that means I'm vintage fashion now. Anyway, during our conversation, I mentioned Simone. "Tell me more about her," she asked. So I gave her the reduced-calorie version of my time with Simone, saying how much I'd learned. "You know," she said, "while researching this article, it seems that anyone doing anything even remotely interesting back then mentioned that they had studied with Simone. All roads led back to Simone." "Well, there's your article then," I said. While the article itself wasn't the best written and was inaccurate in some details, it was an opportunity to give Simone some of her due. She ate, drank, breathed patternmaking, and was astonishing at it. Perhaps she was difficult as a teacher, you don't say, and she could be maddening at times. But I value what I learned from her more than my college degree. It enabled me to stand on her shoulders and see further, to see the kinds of work that I've been able to create. It made my career possible. So this podcast is my homage to Simone Sethna. Thanks for listening. You can get the audiobook All Grown Up Now on iTunes, Audible, and Amazon, or from my website, allgrownupnow.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have any questions, you can reach me through the website, allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, kennethdking.com.